I have not done a good enough job of explaining the meme convert to Judaism. So Touch of Tism, he's confused. He's saying functionally, how would conversion work? How should someone's convert? Would this group of converts mix with Jews? Should these converts convert but retain their separate population? So whenever I talk about converting to Judaism, I'm doing it in a subjective sense. I'm doing it in a relativistic sense. I'm not putting out there objectively that universally everyone should do this. I'm always doing it in a relative fashion. I'm always doing it in a subjective fashion. So what am I doing? What am I doing subjectively here? And I'm sorry, I'm distracted by Owen Benjamin. Let's just switch over here. So I'm doing it with respect to Islam. And I've done this before, and I've made videos on this before, and I could just say, hey, rewatch the video, because I'm not going to repeat myself. But I will repeat myself, because obviously I wasn't clear enough. The way in which I said it didn't make sense. So we have people who are not Jews, who are not Muslims. They could be atheists, they could be Christian. They could be agnostic, they could be pagan, they could be any number of things. And they come to some point where they say, they identify Muslims as being on the rise. Muslim population is rising. Muslims are fertile. Muslims are powerful. Muslims, it's so crazy. Every time a Muslim attacks somebody, sympathy for Muslims increases. Now, this is the most counterintuitive thing. I would never guess it if it was not backed up by research and data. That when people are polled on their attitudes toward Muslims, for instance, a question will be asked like, should we have sympathy for Muslims? Are Muslims being oppressed? They ask these kinds of questions before and after an incident, a big terrorist incident, not 9/11, but subsequent incidents, bombings, shootings, Christmas market attacks, mass rapes. They ask questions to gauge people's sympathy towards Islam. And when an attack happens, sympathy increases, which is a very special category, or it's a very special kind of group, that whenever it does something and it attacks a host nation, the host nation actually becomes more sympathetic toward this minority group. So that's special. Now, at the end of the day, what I would say is that this is not the doing of Muslims, right? The public perception of Muslims is not created by Muslims, it's created by a media. And the media is not owned by Muslims, despite what Alex Jones will tell you. The media is not owned by Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, the Saudis have money in Al Jazeera, they have money, the Gulf Emirates and whatnot. But they're not the majority stakeholders, they're not the biggest players in the game. And furthermore, you look at where their money comes from, and it comes from America, and we know that America is the most Zionist country outside of Israel. So, you know, Saudi Arabia really is an Israeli puppet in that sense. So if you're talking about, oh, the Saudis, they own the media. Well, I mean, who owns Saudi Arabia effectively? How does Saudi Arabia get its money? What are its military allies? And sure, Saudi Arabia has supported Al-Qaeda, but America has also supported Al-Qaeda. Israel has supported Al-Qaeda. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just admitting, you know, Zbigniew Brzezinski went over. He helped fund the Taliban. We know that when we talk about moderate Syrian rebels, we're talking about Al-Qaeda. And when we talk about extreme Syrian rebels, we're talking about ISIS. And these groups were just funded by America. And they were funded by Israel. They were supported. So, you know, that's just the admitted data out there, that we were anti-Assad because Assad was against Al-Qaeda, essentially. He was against these ideological Salafists, and Saudi Arabia has funded them. But that's no different than the behavior of Israel or America. So just saying that, oh, well, Saudi Arabia funded the 9/11 hijackers, and therefore that shows that there's a difference between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Well, no, they're really on the same page as far as that goes. So what is, you know, what am I trying to say here when I say convert to Judaism? I'm saying that with respect to people who bring up Islam. Because I have people who bring up Islam and say, convert to Islam, Islam's the way, Islam's the future. And I say, well, who controls Islam? Who directs Islam? All these Islamic countries, these Muslim countries, the Muslim refugee crisis, who created that? Who created the mythology where Europeans are so xenophilic that they want their countries to become Muslim? Who psychologically primed Europeans to be this way, to hate themselves, to be egophobic or autophobic? They're kind of afraid of themselves. Like if you go to Germany and you ask the Germans, is it okay to be proud of being German? Is it okay to love Germany, to be patriotic? They'll say, no, we're very afraid of that, because then we might start hurting minorities. Because in our past, whenever we felt good about ourselves and we took pride in our identity, we hurt minorities. We hurt non-European people. And so, you know, who did that? Who did that process of denazification that led to that present state of Germany and really led to the state of Europe? I mean, it's not just Germany that's been denazified. All of Europe has been denazified. So who did that? What was their intentions? What were the two sides in World War II? Who were the two big power blocks? What you know, if World War II was ideology, well, you had Democrats fighting alongside communists. You had you know, Catholics and Protestants teaming up with communists, atheist communists. Is that the ideological plane? Was it a religious war? Was it a war of the freedom versus dictatorship? Was it an ethnic war? I mean, these are questions that people should ask and investigate. So, to me, Islam has always been sort of on the periphery. Islam has never really been a power in itself. Now, Islam, to the extent that it can take a back seat and allow the Janissaries to run the show, then you have had Muslim countries or Muslim empires. The Ottoman Empire was very effective because it was able to utilize non-Islamic populations, to utilize the Janissaries, to utilize these populations. You have to remember, the Ottoman Empire was 25% Christian, which is very significant. So, you know, their armies, their generals, their military minds were not coming out of Islam. Islam did not generate the golden age of Islam, for instance. When we talk about the golden age of Islam, I don't view that as coming from Islam itself. I view that as you had a period of stabilization after mass conquest, and during that period, a lot of the pre-Islamic institutions and pre-Islamic thought, and you had Platonic thought, you had the Greeks, you had the Romans, they were translating the Latin and Greek into Arabic, and this launched a scientific revolution in the Middle East. But that wasn't due to Islam. It was actually due to the fact that, you know, you finally had the violence of Islam was sort of quelled, and the disruptive force of Islam sort of entered into a peaceful mode because it had just conquered everybody in the Middle East. And so there was no more warfare, and people were allowed to get back to science and learning. And they went to these Europeans, the Greeks and the Romans, they uncovered that knowledge, and they had a scientific revolution. But that petered out pretty quickly. And ever since then, it's not really been a source of creativity. It's not really been a source of greatness. It's been in decline for a very long time, and it continues to decline. When I look at the fertility rates of Islam, they're declining. So I think Islam is very much a paper tiger. Islam looks great on paper, but it fails a lot of tests of its internal nature. What's going on behind the scenes with Islam? So if someone told me I'm willing to convert to Islam, I would say, okay, you're willing to take Arabic and make it a holy language, to go learn Arabic and say, oh yeah, Arabic is this beautiful language. You know, I might disagree with you, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Arabic really is a beautiful language, and I'm just too much of a xenophobe to realize that. What's the difference between Arabic and Hebrew? In my mind, you know, Arabic and Hebrew, which is the better language? Which is the better culture? Islamic culture or Jewish culture? These are questions I would ask people. And I think, and part of why I'm framing it in this way is because I think one of the big differences between Islam and Judaism is that Judaism in the last 2,000 years has essentially eradicated its warrior culture. Now, if you go read the Torah, you read about battles and you read about people with swords, Jews with swords, and we know of the Maccabees. So we know that there were Jews in the past, the Jewish revolt, where Jews did take up arms to defend themselves. And in recent history, since, 1947 or whatever, Jews, Zionists, have taken up arms and they farmed the land. So, 2,000 years ago there was a Jewish warrior class, and today they've tried to bring that back. But there's a gap there of about 2,000 years where Jews were mostly living in urban settlements. They were not really allowed to farm the land legally. And so their warrior class, their connection to the body, their connection, and you see this in the facial morphology, that their whole warrior spirit was sort of wiped out. And what replaced that was, to an extent, a priestly spirit, but also a mercantile spirit. And when you look at the trajectory of humanity over the last 10,000 years, the story of the Jews is really the story of humanity writ large. And who is the guy? Is it Slezkin? I think it's Murray Slezkin, but I could be getting that wrong. Wow, let's see if I search Mercurial Slezkin. No, I'm just getting a bunch of medical data. Mercurial age Jew. Let's see if that comes up. Yuri Slezkine. So I spelled it with an S. I guess that's he's the author of the book The Jewish Century, 2004. Mozambique. That's an interesting. Slezkin characterizes the Jews, alongside other groups such as the Armenians and overseas Chinese, as a Mercurian people specializing exclusively in providing services to the surrounding food-producing societies, which he characterizes as Apollonians. This division is, according to him, reoccurring in pre-20th century societies. With the exception of the Gypsies, these Mercurian peoples have all enjoyed great socioeconomic success relative to the average among their hosts, and have all, without exception, attracted hostility and resentment. A reoccurring pattern of the relationship between Apollonians and Mercurian people is that the social representation of each group by the other is symmetrical. For instance, Mercurians see Apollonians as brutes, while Apollonians see Mercurians as effeminate. Mercurians develop a culture of purity and national myths to cultivate their separation from the Apollonians, which allows them to provide international services as intermediaries and through diplomacy. These Mercurians also provide services that are taboo for the local Apollonian culture, linked to death, magic, sexuality, pornography, or banking, or finance, or the mafia, or drugs, opioids. Slezkin develops this thesis by arguing that the Jews, the most successful of these Mercurian peoples, have increasingly influenced the course and nature of Western societies, particularly during the early and middle periods of Soviet communism, and that modernity can be seen as a transformation of Apollonians into Mercurians. So that's a very interesting. The Jewish Century, Chapter 1, The Jews and Other Nomads. So it's very interesting. I mean, people should read Yuri Slezkin. Fascinating guy, brilliant guy. And when you bring up the concept of a nomad, I think of the Indo-Europeans. Now, what's the difference between the Indo-Europeans and these Mercurian peoples? Well, the Indo-Europeans were warriors. That was their specialty, war. They would go in, they would ride in on their chariots with their horses, and they would dominate. And there was no competition. It was just it was a military supremacy. And, in ancient texts we talk about Natufians? Is that the term? The Natufian? No, that's not what I'm talking about. Talking about the giants. Ooh, this is interesting. Indo-European.eu. Never heard of this website. So we'll let that load. But the Nephilim, I think I'm talking about. The giants. You know, there's this concept that there were these giants who would just go around dominating everybody. Now, whether or not the Indo-Europeans were giants, I don't have any sort of archaeological evidence to suggest that Indo-Europeans were giants. But I do basically see this Indo-European expansion. And I have to look at it as... Whoa, there's a lot of information on here. I have to look at this as a consequence of military supremacy. Whether or not they were taller than their neighbors or not, the Indo-Europeans really had some amazing military ability. Whereas, you know, the Hebrews didn't go around militarily dominating everyone in the Middle East. They, of course, did a little bit of that, certainly in the lands of Canaan. They took out the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Hittites, and they took out these people and that people. They were able to dominate locally, but they never had the extreme capability for expansion that the Indo, and that's sort of an unmatched military supremacy. I can't think of any group that would be more successful in history, other than in terms of military history, other than the Indo-Europeans. They just covered more ground than anybody else. And this website, Indo-European.eu, or Indo-European.eu, is an interesting thing. They're talking about R1B. I don't know who writes this website or what their whole thing is. They're looking at maps. This reminds me of the Dianekis anthropology blog. That was an old... Whoa. There's memes. He's using memes. He's using Star Wars memes. Recent Star Wars memes. So what's going on here? The expansion of the Indo-Slavonic, Balto-Slavic. From a Western Slavic Baltic perspective, the Indo-European demic diffusion model probably means for West Slavs and Balts being potentially origin as early as the Nordic community and earlier than Italo-Celtic communities. So he's making the argument that the Slavic Baltic population is most similar to the original Indo-Europeans. And from the map he's pointing out here, it looks like Poland is most similar to the original Indo-Europeans. And this is kind of, I guess this is sort of an anti-Western, anti-Nordic take on Indo-European studies. So I'm scanning through that and trying to make a point. He's against the R1A. He's against Cosinian views. I've never heard of that. Eurocentric or Indocentric views. Madison Grant. The step theory, which I like the step theory. I think the step theory makes a lot of sense when you look at an analogous culture like the Mongols. The step theory makes a lot of sense to me. So I don't know. I don't know what is the alternative theory. Where does he think? Does he think the Indo-Europeans come from Poland? The Yamna Bell-Beaker expansion is now mainstream. So how is that not a step theory? I'm just trying to find what is his theory. Yamnaya, corded ware. This is a lot of anthropology. Indo-European. I mean, to me, usually the thing you do with linguistics is you look at diversity density. So usually the more dense the diversity of the language, the more likely it is that that's where it originated. So take England, for example. The English language has the greatest amount of diversity of dialects within England. So you've got basically every city has its own dialect. And even London. London has, different parts of London have their own dialect of English. Now you go to America, people from California, people from the Northeast, people from Florida, they all kind of speak the same standard American English. Now there are different Southern dialects, but generally you look at Australia, they all sort of speak one Australian dialect. New Zealand speaks one New Zealand dialect. South Africa speaks one South African dialect. The density of diversity of English dialects in England points to the idea that that's where English originated, which it happens to be true. We have the historical record to prove that. So I'm looking at Europe and I'm saying the greatest diversity of Indo-European language family seems to be in Europe. So I would say it probably originated close to Europe. Also, we can do a geographic analysis saying what's the furthest extent. Okay, so on one hand we have Ireland, on the other hand we have Bangladesh. So the Indo-European homeland probably likely is at the center of this diffusion, which would, you know, end up somewhere in Iran or the Ukrainian steppe. So those are two different analyses. Hittites, we're looking at the Hittites. The future of the steppe ancestry equals Indo-European fallacy. Corded ware, Yamnaya. And so what is the argument here? I just want to know that what is the conclusion? Where does he believe? Whoa. Reactionary views, inferiority complex, racism, narcissism. If you've supported continuity theories of Balto-Slavic or Germanic, then you're a racist. R1A is a great haplogroup. So this guy's like an extreme anti-racist. He really hates Basque racists and Indian nationalists. What? I wonder what this guy's ancestry is. Why he is so... Hindu nationalists share a reactionary view. They want to show religious and cultural continuity broken by Islam. What is going on? Iranian farmer ancestry and Indus River Valley responsible for Indo-Aryan expansion. R1A is not relevant anymore. A product of late bottlenecks from steppe incomers. Racism based on ancestry or haplogroup is not the driving force here. Okay. This is very weird. I feel like if you have a .eu domain, you're probably subject to some pretty extreme censorship. Seems to be how the Indo-European, or how the European Union goes. An Indo-European Union would be pretty interesting. Oh, what are we looking at here? This is too complicated to just do on a video. So I recommend some people go. Let's all go back to. Let's all go back to this website at a later time. I'm going to try to just skim through and see what are the important things for next time. But really what we were supposed to talk about... Oh my goodness. Really what we're supposed to talk about is Judaism versus Islam. And I can't find the argument to tell me why I should convert to Islam instead of Judaism. I'm just saying if you're going to convert to a religion and you're considering Islam, then I would be like, hey, you're considering Islam. It has a Semitic language. You're going to worship Muhammad. Most Muslims are non-white. So if you're open to converting to that kind of religion where you have those different characteristics, I would say, well, have you thought about Judaism? And I think, you know, I think I know why people would love Islam and hate Judaism. But if they actually reveal their reasons, then they look kind of stupid. Because on the one hand, these people are obsessed with power. They're like, we have to convert to Islam because that's the future. That's what's powerful. You have to go with the curve, you know, if you can't beat them, join them, sort of thing. And I say, well, what about Judaism? And they're like, no, the Jews are the elites and they rule the world and they're evil. So it's like, wait a second, you were just telling me you want to convert to Islam because you feel like that's the future. That's where the wave of humanity is heading. That's where you feel like we're all going. But you're not going to convert to Judaism? And I think Murray Slezkin gets it right. I think Yuri Slezkin, not Murray, I don't know why I keep putting an M at the beginning, but Yuri Slezkin, and they even have the Russian here. He's Russian born. So Yuri Slozkin, I think is how you say it in Russian. The E umlaut. So anyway, we've got Yuri Slezkin, and he's saying that Judaism is Mercurian, whereas Islam could be described within Slezkin's dichotomy. Islam could be described as Apollonian. Now, I would say primarily that Judaism is mercantile, where Islam tends to be a little more of a warrior religion, and I think you have people who feel like Christianity is cucked. Christianity is no longer a warrior religion, so they're looking out there and they're saying, what is the warrior religion? Well, it's certainly not Christianity anymore, because Christianity is all about peace and love and happiness and letting in foreigners and whatever. And so you've got people who are saying, no, the warrior religion is Islam. And I don't think these people have fully articulated or fully understand the reasons why they like the masculine Islam and they don't like the effeminate Christianity. They don't like effeminate Judaism. And, James O'Meara I haven't read James O'Meara book because I look at his writing, and it's, there's the personal aspect of it, of who he is personally and what he does in his private life, which is kind of public at this point. And then there's also, it's just very kind of dense, and like the footnotes are longer than the thing itself. But that's the basic premise. I'm not the originator of these ideas. Nothing I say is original. I'm stealing it from everyone else. And people have pointed this out, and I think people have to realize that, and we have to talk about it consciously rather than just sort of gravitating to things as our instincts draw us to them. Like, we are drawn to sexual speciation. We're drawn to masculine men and feminine women. Just naturally, we have an attraction when a man looks masculine. We're like, hey, he should be in charge. He should be our leader. I want to follow him. And when a woman looks feminine, we think, yeah, she's hot, she's beautiful, she's attractive. And so that sexual speciation, we have to understand, comes from warrior selection. That when you have a population that is subject to warrior selection, to warrior pressure, when there is a warrior ideal, then men are pushed to be masculine, women are pushed to be feminine, men are pushed to be the aggressive warrior type, and women are pushed to be the motherly feminine type. That's how you get that physical picture. Men with strong jaws, women with curvy bodies. That hormonal impact, that ideal, comes from warrior culture. And when you remove warrior culture, you get women who don't have curves and they just sort of look like a box. Even if they're skinny, they got these broad shoulders and they're kind of like, they kind of look like goblins. And then you have men who have weak jaws where, they don't even have a jaw. If they turn to the side, it goes from their lip to the neck and there really is no jaw. That's the sort of thing. When you remove the selective pressure of the warrior ideal, then you end up, over many generations, if you don't select for something, you're selecting against something. That's the law of genetic drift. If you don't select for a certain type, then you're selecting against that type. So if you don't select for a strong jaw, you're selecting against a strong jaw. Now, a strong jaw is just an expression of hormones, basically. If you have high testosterone, you're more likely to have the strong jaw. Testosterone is associated with impulsive behavior, competitive behavior, physical activity, strong body, right? So when we look at the shape of the face and the jaw, really what's being selected for there is not just the jaw itself, but it's a whole host, it's a cornucopia of behavioral qualities that are connected with the warrior ideal, the warrior archetype. And if you remove that archetype, then you lose all those qualities, and you actually see it in the face. That over generations, if you do this to a population, you remove that ideal, their faces change. The jaw starts receding. And, you know, the proportions of the body and the face sort of move away from the warrior ideal. Again, if you're not selecting for something, genetic mutation, genetic drift dictates that you will eventually select against that trait. And so this is what happens. And so instinctually, we all, in a deep sense, we are Paleolithic. Our ancestors were Paleolithic 10,000 years ago, everyone. Now, some people are more recently Paleolithic. Northern Europeans were Paleolithic up until about 5,000 years ago, in some cases even more recent. But Northern Europeans are some of the most recent Paleolithic peoples. Now we can find other isolates, the Andaman Islands, the Brazilian interior, the bush people of South Africa. We can find other examples. But Northern Europeans are an interesting example because they're a population which was extremely successful as a Paleolithic group, and that's why they resisted adopting agriculture, because they were so successful as Paleolithic people, and they were actually able to compete with the Neolithic agriculturalists. They were able to fight them off and defeat them in battle. Sort of like, imagine if the Native Americans were even stronger, even tougher, even smarter, and the Europeans try to come in and do their agricultural Neolithic thing, their civilized thing. And imagine if the Native Americans were just brilliant and geniuses, and they were extremely strong, they could repel them for a much longer time. In our timeline, Europeans came in 1492, and by the 1800s, Native American resistance had pretty much been eliminated. So it took a couple hundred years, whereas with the Paleolithic peoples of Northern Europe, it took thousands of years for them to fall and finally become urbanized and finally become agriculturalists. And it wasn't even something that was absolute, because you even look at the Viking expansion from 700 AD to about 1000 AD, that itself was Paleolithic. You had warriors going out, and their job, their role was the warrior role, not to farm the land. They didn't want to stay in Norway or Sweden or Denmark or northern Germany. They didn't want to stay there and farm the land. They wanted to go out and expand and be nomadic warriors. And that is the path of the Paleolith, to be an explorer, to be a nomad, to go around the world, to travel, to go from one pasture to the other, not to stay there and be a farmer, but to go out and be a warrior. And that's what the Vikings did. So that spirit, that Paleolithic spirit, did not die when Northern Europe started to adopt agriculture. It still hung on, and you saw it in the Viking Age. And we're coming to a period now where it's being ever more encroached upon, and it's being encroached upon with a greater speed because of technology. You know, technology it's a Neolithic technology that's coming in, and there's a reaction to it, right? Ted Kaczynski, he got very angry about this, and he wrote a manifesto, and he got violent. And I don't recommend that. So you have to look at the whole context, and you have to see, is the future a Muslim future or is it a Jewish future? Now, if you're willing to convert to Islam, again, if you have no problem with speaking a Semitic language, if you have no problem with calling non-whites part of your religion, then I don't see how you could like Islam and not like Judaism, if not for this dialectic between the warrior class and the mercantile class. If not for this dialectic between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. If that wasn't the most important factor, then I don't see why people would consider Islam but not Judaism. How they could love Islam but not Judaism. So I think it really does come down to the distinction between the warrior class and the merchant class. And the question is, where are we going? First of all, objectively, where is the future headed? Because you have to put yourself in the position of the dinosaur. And, you know, you have to ask, if you're a dinosaur a million years ago, or a billion, or however long, I don't care when the Jurassic was. Maybe it was 40 million years ago, I don't care. 400, who cares? We know about the dinosaurs. We know that they had a certain survival strategy. And we could call it an Apollonian strategy. Meanwhile, you had these little mammals, these rats running around. And they maybe had what we could call a Mercurian strategy. They were small, they were weak, but they reproduced quickly, and they could get through cracks and crevices, and they could hide from predators. So their survival strategy was more about deception, whereas the dinosaurs were more about bigger and better and sharper and stronger and faster. And they had this kind of Apollonian, there's kind of a Faustian quality, the expansion of muscle and the expansion of teeth and terror and nastiness and violence. The strategy of dinosaurs, even vegetarian dinosaurs, were very violent in their defensive mechanisms, they would run very fast. So dinosaurs were kind of an Apollonian type, and mammals were sort of a Mercurian type in that respect. And so that's a division that's been going on for a while. And of the dinosaurs that survived, it was really the chickens and the small lizards and the small little critters that survived, the insects. Those were survived. The big, bad, Apollonian, violent, warrior-type dinosaurs, they didn't survive. So it's kind of funny, you have these white nationalists who claim to only care about race. Now, of course, genetically, if you do genetic studies, Ashkenazi Jews are much closer to European populations than, say, Yemeni or Saudi or other Moroccan populations, whatever. But they don't care about that. They claim to only care about genes. They don't just care about genes. Oftentimes, they're friendlier to Islam than Judaism because they view Islam as a competitor, but they at least say, well, okay, it's a warrior-type people. It's a Apollonian-type people, whereas the Jews are Mercurian, they're mercantile, and that is the fundamental problem. I have no... Wait, what? I don't get it. Kenny Ann Conway, how does... I was leaving you confused, so that's... I don't know what that means. Maybe it's time to get post-political and make the channel a let's read of psychological literature. Very therapeutic. Well, I'm glad you say that, Fourth Density. I don't know what more I have to say about... I don't know what more I have to say about the Islam versus Judaism thing. Judaism is not an evangelical religion. It's not going out there and asking for converts. Now, if you have something good... Now, let me give you an example. Let's say you have an advertisement on YouTube, and the advertisement says, I just found a great way to make money, and I only work 2 hours a day, and I earn about $1 million a month, and I want to share that secret with you. Now, ask yourself, what's going on here? What's really going on is this person doesn't have a secret. They're a con artist. They're selling you self-help, motivational, power positivity stuff. They're selling you, oh, well, just do Google AdSense, or just go be a marketing dude. Go call Walmart and say, I have a marketing company, can I be a partner? And then you just go advertise Walmart and you pump up their, digital marketing, online internet marketing. You're going to make $1 million working 2 hours a day. I mean, if it was that simple, then he wouldn't give away the secret, because the more people you have in that industry, the greater the supply, the lower the price. So if you have something like, let's say, let's look at porn as an example. People are willing to pay porn actors, porn actresses, thousands of dollars to shoot scenes. If everyone was willing to do that, if 100% of the population was willing to do that, and 100% of the population was attractive enough to do that, then the salary of porn actors would be very low. The reason why porn actors still get paid a decent amount in the short term, to say nothing of the long-term consequences, but they get paid a decent amount in the short term, is because there's a limited supply of them. Not everyone's willing to do that. Not everyone's attractive enough to do that. We can give many other examples where people are paid because they are limited. So anytime you're working in a field, if you're working in the marketing field and you're making a lot of money, you wouldn't go out and tell everybody your secret. Same thing with a stock. If you're making money with the stock, you wouldn't let everybody on the oh, these are the perfect stocks to buy. Because if everyone buys those stocks, the prices are eventually going to go down. If you have something good, if you don't have something valuable, you don't share it with everybody. Now, I'm not making any money off these ideas. If the ideas that I had that I share here on YouTube, if these were great ideas for making money, I wouldn't share them. You know, if I wanted that money for myself, if I wanted to monopolize the money, I wouldn't share those ideas. Because then the field would be flooded with other people using the same tactics, using the same strategies to make money. And if it's marketing, then, you know, I wouldn't share. If I had some marketing secrets, I wouldn't share those with everybody, because then you'd get all these people stealing my secrets, and the price or the salary of whatever I was doing, the work that I was doing, would then be flooded with other people, and I wouldn't make as much money anymore. So with Judaism, there's already a kind of implicit suggestion that Judaism really does have something special. Because if they had nothing to offer, then if you have trash, if you have something that's trash, then you're going to go to everybody and say, hey, look at this gold I have. Don't you want to be part of my secret club? You're going to do this multi-marketing scheme, which is kind of what Bernie Madoff did, right? Bernie Madoff said, I have these great loans, I have great securities. And he was doing a pyramid scheme, and he was a con man. He went out to people and he said, look, I've got the best deals for you, you know, sign up for my program. Give your money to me and I'll give you all these great returns. So he was evangelizing his system to people, and it was a pyramid scheme. Judaism doesn't evangelize. Judaism doesn't want you to be part of the club, because I think Judaism does actually have some very powerful mythological structures, and it doesn't want other people to have those structures because it wants a monopoly on those structures, which is sort of a natural thing if you think about it. If you have something good, you don't want to share it with everybody. If you have some secret about the universe that makes you powerful, you don't want to share it with everybody. So Judaism does accept converts, but it's difficult. Whereas Islam is like, hey, have you heard about Muhammad? Do you want to become a Muslim? They just want everybody. They want poor people in their religion. They want low IQ people. They'll accept anybody. Judaism is selective. And that's what I think what makes Judaism so powerful, is that it is selective, it is preferential. They don't want to just accept anybody off the street. They want to accept top-tier people. So Jared Kushner, who does he marry? He marries Ivanka Trump. So she's the daughter of a very, very rich man. One of the richest men in the country, if not the world. So he makes a very particular choice in who he's going to marry. He converted her to Judaism. She's now an Orthodox Jew. And the children are now part of Judaism. So you look at when Jews choose to marry non-Jews, when they choose to marry non-Jews, who do they marry? White people. Jews are some of the most racist people on the planet in terms of when they don't marry Jews, very commonly they marry white people. Whereas when white people don't marry Christians, or they don't marry in their in-group, they're much more often marrying, if you get a Jew who says, I'm not going to marry within Judaism, I'm not going to marry within my tribe, they still marry white at very high percentage. We're talking like 90% of Jews who don't marry another Jew still marry white people. They're not marrying Asians. They're not. Now, of course, Mark Zuckerberg did marry an Asian woman, so I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But there's a huge degree of selectivity. Selectivity is how you gain power, when you're selective, when you're not just willing to accept anyone into your club. And that's part of the reason why, it's just one of another million reasons not to just cooperate. Oh, you should just go on other people's channels, do interviews, interact with other people. Well, I could do that, and that would sort of be an Islamic strategy, right? Hey, if you're poor, come join Islam. If you're oppressed, come join Islam. If you're, a black American, you should come join Islam. That's how Islam evangelizes. They say, we want poor people, we want oppressed people in our group. Whereas Jews don't do that. Jews don't go to homeless people and say, hey, come join Judaism. They're not evangelizing to poor people. They evangelize to rich people. They say, hey, you're the president of Harvard, you should be a Jew, you should convert to Judaism. Hey, you're the daughter of one of the richest men in the country, you should join Judaism. So that it's not that Jews don't accept any converts. They do accept some converts, but they select them very selectively. They're very carefully. They want high quality people. They don't want, and now of course their sense of quality is a mercantile sense, not a warrior sense. So they're not looking for people who are great at athletics or who are great in sports, who have that warrior ethos of honor and whatever. They don't care much about that. But they're looking, are you good with money? Are you smart? Do you have high agency? Do you have high willpower? Are you driven to power? Do you have the will to power? It's part of the reason why Nietzsche was so philo-Semitic. He looked at the Jews, he's like, these people have an awesome will to power. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing there. I would like to hear some people make points, some actual points, because all I got out of the Muslims is the Muslims were just saying things like, you're stupid, which wasn't really a substantive argument that I could actually engage with. And then they were saying things like, people were saying, well, Gunan and all these perennialists liked Islam, and I'm like, that's just an appeal to authority. What is the argument? Tell me the argument. I mean, I guess you could say, well, read this book. Okay, well, what does the book say? Summarize the points of the book. What are the points? I don't hear the points. So I understand why people can tell me, they could say, we are warriors, we hate merchants. And if that's your attitude, I'm not going to change your mind. So I'm not telling people to convert to Judaism objectively or universally. I'm not evangelizing Judaism, because I think that's kind of contradictory. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying here is I'm saying that if you're considering converting to Islam, then you should give Judaism a second look. Because, I just don't understand, I don't see why you would be okay with Islam but not okay with Judaism. And I think the reason at the end of the day, it's this merchant-warrior dichotomy. That to me seems very obvious. It seems to me to be very obvious, but people don't see it. And I'm at this point where I'm kind of caught between, because I'm really turned off by these warriors who think people who think they're warriors, who think they're tough, and they're like, yeah, we're going to convert to Islam because Europe needs a new warrior religion. We're going to be badass warriors. We're going to cut people's heads off. We're going to put women in burqas. And I look at that and I'm like, you're stupid. You're stupid. All you talk about all day is, oh, we're going to be Ragnar Redbeard, social Darwinists. All we care about is power. I'm like, if all you care about is power, convert to Judaism. That's a great way to gain power. So these people seem to me to be very dumb. They associate power with strong jaws and warrior types and athletic people. The Chad. It's almost like the Chad is a virgin in the world of power. The Chad, people who look like a Chad, are not ultimately the people at the end of the day, or the people who think like a Chad are not the people at the end of the day who are winners. The people who are winners in the world for the last 10,000 years seem to be, again and again and again, they seem to be agriculturalists who had weaker jaws than the Paleolithic people. They seem to be the Jews. They seem to be the urbanists, the people building cities. They seem to be merchants. We seem to be continuing to head in this direction, and yet you've still got people who are just running on instinct and saying that, oh, we just need to convert to Islam because we need to renew our warrior spirit. Yeah, I'm not sure this warrior spirit is going to work anymore, at least not for humans. I think once we start talking about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, then you could see a renewal of the warrior spirit, but it would be a post-human warrior spirit. It wouldn't be a human warrior spirit anymore. The concept of a knight in shining armor with a sword, kind of a Paleolithic ideal. I mean, of course, the Paleolithic peoples didn't have metallurgy. They didn't have swords and armor and whatever. But that idea of that being the powerful man is the bodybuilder. If you look at a bodybuilder, that's the powerful man. That's the ideal. That's who you want to be. But do bodybuilders rule the world? I don't think so. I think people who rule the world are actually pretty mesomorphic. They're not very impressive in terms of their physicality. Physicality is not what grants global dominance and global power. So if that's what you're looking for, global power, global dominance, then you need to stop thinking like a warrior and need to start thinking like a merchant. And this whole concept, to me, that is why, Mr. Cool Mug, that is why I want to define myself as left-wing, because these warriors seem to hate the left. They hate merchants, they hate liberalism, and they love nationalism. They love Apollonianism. They love this thing. And I'm increasingly skeptical of warriorism as a feasible, realistic strategy, survival strategy for the future. I think it has to be, you have to move away from that. Now, I've tried to come up with some third path, a priestly path, where you don't have to just be a merchant, but you're not going to tie yourself to the dying breed, the dying strategy of the warrior. You're going to take a sort of a third path with the priest. That's what I've tried to do. But it doesn't seem to be working. People don't understand that, because I think the priestly path is kind of empty. Now, Mr. Cool Mug denies this. He says, I accept the difference between the warrior, merchant, and priest. We had a specific culture when warriors dominated. Now we have a specific culture that results from merchants being in charge. Why not use the term bourgeoisie? Because bourgeoisie is French, and I don't like French people. That's kind of a joke, but actually the word bourgeoisie is quite ugly, and it's confusing, and it's tied to Marxism, and it has all this baggage and connotations that come, and you say bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is actually a bourgeoisie term. When I hear, oh, those darn bourgeoisie, if someone says that to me, I assume, okay, you're bourgeoisie, you have a bourgeois. When someone uses that word, I know that they themselves are part of the bourgeoisie, that they consider themselves an intellectual. I hate the term, and everyone hates the term. You know when someone uses the word bourgeoisie, like, seriously, like they're seriously down, they're like, these bourgeoisie, they're just destroying the planet. You know there's something wrong with them. You know they're part of Antifa or something like that. It's a worn out term. It's a bad term. It's an ugly term. You just look at the word. It's got way too many consonants. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 consonants. Like half the word is just consonants. It's unnecessary consonants. And I don't like it. So Mr. Cool Mug doesn't agree that the priestly role is ascetic. The role of the priest is the same role as the artist, although to a far greater and more intense degree than the artist, and that is to make the whole world out of its contradictions. Western priests did this by explicating the Bible. So to me, the priest and the artist is someone who takes something and makes meaning out of it and creates harmony. And so the role of the priest is very subjective. It's very relative to the world in which the priest finds themselves. And so a priest 1,000 years ago in Europe is very different from a priest today. That's because they're dealing with different circumstances. And so my argument is that the warrior type is sort of more objective. The warrior type's more concrete because the warrior is concerned with the body. Schopenhauer kind of talks about this as the body being the first object which we perceive. And so the warrior is sort of more primary in his perception. He's more grounded in reality. He's more grounded in concrete things. The merchant is totally abstract. The merchant's dealing with numbers. The merchant makes his fortune by skimming 1% off the top of everyone's bank account. 1% interest a year, and the merchant becomes rich in this way by skimming, and you could call it a form of parasitism, but it's very abstract, very numerical. It has to do with numerology, and so that's the role. So the warrior and the priest are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. The priest sort of navigates and deals with the world as it is given. There is a degree of abstraction with the priest, and when I use these terms, I'm dealing with semantics in a way that is priestly. And Mr. Cool Mug criticizes me by saying there's no substance to what you're saying. It's all relativistic. It's all subjective. You're playing word games. You're playing semantics. Well, I'm saying that the logos in the word is sacred, and Mr. Cool Mug doesn't accept that. He says these left and right are exhausted terms. The natural radical course is the rejection of the terms, not an attempt to rehash them. Language and terminology are important, but we need new terms for new ideas, just like we put new wine into new bottles. The change will come from without the allowed system of language, not within. So I love that comment. I love it not because I like it. I don't like it because it's criticism, but I love it because it's a thoughtful idea and it's good criticism. So, you know, I'll accept this criticism. I'll accept this criticism, and and I'll say that, you know, that's legitimate. That's legitimate. But I think there is, you know, my instant reaction is to just argue against that and to entrench myself further in the position that I've already dug. But I'm going to accept that. I'm going to accept that criticism and move on. So Mr. Kumag also writes, I never liked the term cognitive dissonance because it ignores the complexity of the human mind. It pathologizes the individual instead of trying to understand why someone may hold seemingly or actually contradictory views, but life is full of contradictions. Psychology isn't something someone should weaponize from the armchair. It should be used like an incision knife. It's useful only when used properly. When it isn't useful is when both sides in an argument use it as an argumentative weapon, where you get people pathologizing each other, and the search for truth degenerates into something tedious, and that is something which the left does a lot with words like, oh my, Mr. Coolmug! Mr. Coolmug, you just used the word left. Let me read that again. That is something which the left does a lot. Mr. Coolmug, Mr. Coolmug. Let's hold up here. You just told me, look, 2 hours ago, you told me left and right are exhausted terms. 1 hour ago, you say, that is something which the left does a lot. Mr. Coolmug, you had convinced me. You won me over. I said, you know, Mr. Coolmug, I've been waging this semantic battle. I've been trying to rediscover these terms. I've been trying to reinvent these terms. I've been trying to, in the same way that alt-right, I think for a moment in 2015, 2016, even 2017, it was an amazing semantic turn of phrase, because alt-right, it meant youth, and it meant power, and it meant energy, and it meant excitement, and it was a new way at looking at the right wing that was detached from the conservative movement, and that was something beautiful and amazing, and it created a lot of energy and excitement and intellectual discovery, and now it's sort of reached its nadir, its low point, and I don't want to use that term anymore. And so I was experimenting with left and right and seeing, can we change their definition? Can we look at them in a new way? Can we actually theorize on what is the fundamental difference between the left and the right? And I said, well, the left is liberal and the right is conservative, and therefore the powers that be are conservative and they're right wing, and the powers against them are, and the minority powers, those are the left wing powers. And you rejected that because you said left and right are exhausted terms. We need to throw them out. You said the nature of radical discourse is the rejection of these terms, not an attempt to rehash them. You said language is important, but we need new terms for new ideas. We need to put new wine into new bottles. You said change will come from without the allowed system, not from within. And then you tell me that's something that the left does a lot. The left, Mr. Coolmug? I thought there was no left. I thought we need to stop using these terms. Mr. Coolmug, sir, you make arguments and you contradict yourself. Now, Mr. Coolmug has already got a backup argument, because he said he doesn't like the term cognitive dissonance. It ignores the complexity of the mind. It pathologizes the individual. People may hold seemingly or contradictory views, but life is full of contradictions. Mr. Coolmug, you are full of contradictions. You're full of contradictions. You keep telling me not to talk about left and right, and yet you casually, mistakenly, probably without thinking about it, you use the term, that's something which the left does a lot. The left accuses us of being homophobes, Islamophobes, and racists. That's something the left wing does a lot. And we as the right wing, we really need... What do you mean by left and right? See, Mr. Coolmug, you tell me to stop using the words left and right, and yet you do it yourself? And so how can you expect me to do something that you can't hold yourself to? Why are you holding me to a higher standard than you hold yourself to? Why do you continue to use this? Why do you continue to say that is something which the left does a lot if you tell me I can't use the words left and right? See, the way that Mr. Coolmug uses the word left and right is he means right wing means pro-white and left wing means anti-white. And I'm saying there's a bigger drama to this. There's something bigger going on here than just white people versus non-white people. And I'm saying that the bigger thing happening here is change versus stasis. And another big thing happening is the Paleolithic versus the Neolithic. And another big thing is the merchant class versus the warrior class. And these three dichotomies are actually in alignment. You have the merchants, who are liberal and who like change. You have the warriors, who are Paleolithic, and they want the status quo. And so those are kind of two sides of the human psychological spectrum. And by understanding this deep divide in human nature, we can understand a lot of metapolitics, we can understand social movements, we can understand culture, and we can analyze the last 10,000 years and each movement and each great social shift within the last 10,000 years, we can analyze it with this dichotomy in mind, and it has explanatory power. And we can look at the future of power and dominance of the globe in this light, and it brings understanding and it brings clarity. And you keep railing against me and tell me I can't talk about left and right, but you use the term leftist. And you say, the left does this a lot. So, kind of disappointing, Mr. Coolmug. I tried to... I mean, this is all very sad. I tried to say that maybe you're right, maybe you have a point, maybe we do need to stop talking about the left and the right. And then you do it yourself. So, your lack of consistency is not very convincing. So maybe I should keep using the term left and right just to spite you, or maybe I should drop it. But I think everyone does it. See, that's the problem. It's colloquial. Everyone does it. Everyone uses left versus right. We can't stop. We're addicted to it. Because we know it is true. We know that there are two sides of the coin here. We know that there are two different types. And left and right are, they're intuitive. We have a left hand and a right hand. We are symmetrical creatures. And our symmetry actually goes back millions, if not billions of years. I mean, symmetry is like deep into chemistry. Like elemental in physics, symmetry, Newtonian physics has a symmetry to it. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So symmetry and chirality, the concept of symmetry is like a very deep physical property of the universe that, and we could even say it's metaphysical, that, in terms of the order versus chaos, life versus death, symmetry in left versus right is so ingrained, not just within human psychology, but within the universe and within metaphysics. So, I will try, perhaps, to limit this semantic game of redefining left versus right, because that could be futile. In the same way that, you have Mr. Reagan, you have alt-lighters who say, Democrats are the real racists. Okay, well, that's a cute little trick you're doing there, but maybe it's a waste of time. So I'll admit, maybe this has been a wasted experiment. Maybe this has been a wasted time. But I think everyone, including my critics like Mr. Coolmug, are going to continue to use the word left and right, even if they don't intend to. Hypocritically, they'll continue to do it, and so I'll continue to do it as well. And, it is what it is. But maybe I'll try to move on a new course and try to talk. Because Mr. Coolmug had a good comment about the truth. And he said he was interested in the truth, not just semantic redefining terms, but he was interested in the truth. And I'm going to try to find that. I'm not sure I will be able to find it. Okay. You're saying that you wrongly associated. So this is the thing. He says we shouldn't care about right or left terminology, but you use it yourself, Mr. Coolmug. So we should care about our definitions. We should care about how we use words. You're saying you wrongly associated yourself with the right, even though you've criticized every rightist movement under the sun since year dot. But I don't care that you don't want to be associated with the right. I want to disassociate yourself from the right in an hour and a half long video every day. I just want to hear something new that I'm not getting from anyone else, right or left. I want to hear the truth. I want to hear a good idea. So that's legitimate. And the idea that we're going with that I have been hesitant to make it. I've been hesitant to start making these points that I'm making tentatively, because I don't want to just say one day that I have one opinion and the next day come out with a total opposite opinion. I want a gradual shift, and the reason I want that is because switching back and forth between radically different opinions is not conscientious. It is erratic. It's not thoughtful. And so if I'm going to shift from one opinion to another opinion, if I'm going to make that shift, then I want that shift to be thoughtful. I want to be careful about it. I don't want to just be intellectually careless and say, oh, well, one day I'm all for the warrior class, rah, 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 and the next day I'm for the merchant class, clink, clink, hand rubbing, hand rubbing. I don't want to switch from one to the other in a thoughtless way, in a careless way, because I think this is fundamental to who we are as humans. This distinction between warrior and merchant is so important that to make a switch from one team to the other, from the right to the left, that's such a monumental shift and it's a moral shift at the end of the day. It's a moral, ethical shift. And so you're essentially going from, if you go from the warrior team to the merchant team, it's kind of like, going from being a Christian to a Satanist, or a Satanist to a Christian. You're making a profound moral shift in your thinking. And it's something that I've resisted for a long time, and I've been opposed to for a long time. So it is a massive shift. But it's one that the more I consider, the more I look at things, the more I have been shifting. I definitely at one point was in a state where I said, the traditional European situation is to have a ruling warrior class and a ruling priest class, where the priest class is basically subordinate to the warrior class, and the hierarchy is the warriors are on top, priests are in the middle, merchants are on the bottom. And that was the idea. That was the Indo-European idea. But as I watch the shifting of history over the last 10,000 years, and perhaps longer, I'm seeing that at the end of the day, really, what history seems to be favoring is the merchants are on top, the priests are in the middle, and the warriors are on the bottom. And that's sort of where humanity is. Now, I believe with artificial intelligence, that whole thing is going to shift dramatically. I think that when you have killer robots running the show who are smarter than human beings, and they have artificial intelligence, or you have genetically augmented human beings, we're going to go back to a time of, the Germanic tribes are just constantly fighting with one another. We're going to go back to that land of constant warfare, where you've got artificial intelligence systems constantly warring with one another. So the warrior spirit is going to come out on top again. It's not going to be a mercantile spirit. It's not going to be a spirit of priesthood necessarily. Although you could argue that because, DNA, RNA, computer programming, at the end of the day, that's language, that's semantics, that's the region of the priest. And you could make an argument at quantity versus quality, whatever. But I'm saying that the warrior spirit and competition and the importance of the body and the connection between our DNA and the body with artificial intelligence is going to be the programming and the physical components. They're going to be connected. They're going to be integrated. See, we can't change our DNA at this point. I can't change my DNA. My DNA is what it is. And so maybe I want to have a different DNA. I wish I was taller. I wish I was shorter. I wish I was stronger. I wish I was weaker. I could wish all kinds of things about myself, but I can't change my DNA. I wish I had different physical characteristics. Wish I looked like an elf with pointy ears, or I wish I was like a dwarf with long beard. Whatever I wish about my genetics, I can't make that happen. I can't change it. Now, some people might be able to change their genetics, some weird, magical people, some super rich people, but I can't do that. That's not an option for me. But I think once that becomes possible, there's going to be an integration of the DNA with the consciousness. It's going to result in rapid evolution. It's going to result in a lot of warfare. So planet Earth is going to turn into planet Mars. It's going to turn into a planet of warfare once again. And the peacefulness that we have now is going to disappear. There's going to be no more peacefulness. It's going to be systems against systems. And right now we live in a state where our genetics is telling us to eat a lot of sugar, and then we just do what our genetics says, but the environment doesn't match up with the genetics. When we start being able to mass manipulate genetics, we're going to be in a situation where actually genetics are matched up with the environment, which is something that we haven't had the pleasure of having that for the last 10,000 years. For 10,000 years, we've been moving in a direction where our genetics stay the same and the environment changes radically. And this is only increasing at a hyperbolic speed. And so that's really, we're in a messed up state. But once you can change the genetics, that changes everything. So I'm not a mercantilist in a metaphysical sense, in that I think mercantilism or the merchant idea is this eternal dominant thing that will never come back. I don't believe that. But I do believe that in the present situation, if you're all about ruling the world and you're all about global power, Islam's not the way to go. You'd have to go to Judaism on that one, because it's the more mercantile versus the warrior Islam. And so now we're closing out with some E-Celeb content, because Fourth Density is earning some shares in the Jockle podcast. Fourth Density is moving on up in his share and his dominance of shares with the Jockle podcast. So, I did talk about this on the last podcast, Charles Marlowe. I did check out his stream. He is homeless, and he's fine with that. He believes that homelessness is the superior position. It's better to be homeless than to be a slave. That's his position. He's entitled to his opinions. And he's making... Whoa, what's going on here? There are new hybrid races and ethnicities, myself included. So what exactly is Charles Marlowe's race or ethnicities? What are his multiple races and ethnicities? That's what I want to know, because he looked pretty mono-ethnic to me when I looked at him at first. He looked fairly mono-ethnic, monoracial. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he is a multi-ethnic, multi-racial person. And I guess we'll have to keep watching, keep reading, keep following. But don't gang stalk. So I guess that's the end of the show for today. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.